It's August 23rd, 1305, and London awakens to an execution that will resonate through history. The crowd thickens by the hour, merchants leaving their stalls, nobles descending from their chambers, and common folk streaming in from all over the city. They're not here for bread or ale, but for blood. They've come to watch a man die in the most horrific way imaginable. In the distance, you can hear it. The scraping of wood against stone, the clip-clop of hooves, and something else, a sound that churns your stomach. It's the noise of flesh being dragged across rough cobblestones, leaving a trail of blood for the ravens to follow. The crowd parts like a diseased sea, revealing William Wallace, bound naked to a wooden hurdle and dragged behind a horse. He dared to dream of a free Scotland, now reduced to raw meat on its way to slaughter. His body is a map of England's fury, marked by every stone on the 400-mile journey from Scotland. His skin hangs in ribbons, his back a checkerboard of wounds. Yet his eyes, God help us, still burn with defiance. Even as the crowd spits and throws filth at his broken form, William Wallace refuses to break. Before we delve into these forgotten tales of survival and suffering, if you enjoy uncovering hidden truths of history, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this, and please comment below to let me know where you are listening from. It's amazing that we explore these ancient stories together from different parts of the world, connected across time and space by our shared curiosity about the past. To understand the horror awaiting Wallace in these final moments, we must go back 35 years to a peaceful Scotland. It's 1270, and in the rolling green hills of Renfrewshire, a child is born to Sir Malcolm Wallace, a minor landowner who aspires to tend his fields and serve his lord. They name the boy William, never suspecting that this infant will one day have the most powerful king in Europe, baying for his blood. Young William grows tall and strong in the shadow of the Scottish Highlands. He learns to read and write, a luxury for most men of his station, studies Latin with the monks, and develops a mind as sharp as any blade. But it's his physical prowess that sets tongues wagging. By age 20, William Wallace stands nearly 6.5 feet tall, a giant among men, with shoulders broad enough to carry a nation's hopes and hands, powerful enough to wield a 6-foot sword with deadly precision. Scotland in William's youth is blessed with peace. King Alexander III rules with wisdom and strength, and the land prospers. Markets bustle, harvests flourish, and people sleep soundly in their beds. But fate, that cruel mistress, has other plans. In 1286, during a stormy night reminiscent of a prophecy, Alexander III rides his horse off a cliff near Kinghorn. His death marks the end of Scotland's golden age. The throne goes to Margaret, the Maid of Norway, a 3-year-old who has never set foot in Scotland. For 4 years, the kingdom teeters on the edge, governed by regents and filled with intrigue. Then in 1290, young Margaret dies on her journey to claim her inheritance. Scotland is left without a king, directionless, and on the brink of a decision that will lead to bloodshed for generations. Enter Edward Longshanks, Edward III of England, whose nickname hints at his commanding physical presence. Standing 6 feet 2 inches tall, in an era when most men barely reached 5.5 feet, Edward is a warrior king who has spent his life conquering. Wales has already felt his might, and now his gaze turns north to Scotland. When Scottish nobles, eager to avoid civil war, invite him to mediate between the rival claimants to their throne, they unwittingly welcome a predator. Edward chooses John Balliol, a weak man he believes he can manipulate. But Edward's ambitions are greater than just appointing a king. He demands that Scottish nobles swear loyalty to him, that Scottish legal matters be appealed in English courts, and that Scottish knights fight in his foreign wars. Each demand tightens the noose around Scotland's neck. By 1296, even the submissive Balliol can endure no more humiliation. He tries to assert Scotland's independence, allies with France, and renounces his allegiance to Edward. The English king's response is swift and brutal. His armies invade, and the first city they reach, Berwick-upon-Tweed, becomes a symbol of English wrath. The sack of Berwick is so complete, so brutal, that it etches itself into Scottish memory. Edward's soldiers don't just defeat the defenders, they slaughter everyone in sight. Men, women, children, even infants, fall to English steel. Chroniclers speak of rivers running red, bodies piled like wood, and a silence so profound that even the ravens are silent. 17,000 souls perish in a single day, their only crime being born on the wrong side of an invisible line. This is the Scotland that shapes William Wallace. This is the fiery crucible that forges his unyielding resolve. When Edward strips Balliol of his crown and jewels, forces him to perform public penance in his undergarments, and declares himself overlord of Scotland, young William watches from the shadows. When the Scottish nobles submitted and signed the ragman roll, pledging loyalty to their conqueror, William's jaw clenched with disgust. When English officials started distributing Scottish lands to their cronies, treating the proud kingdom as war spoils, something fundamental broke within the young giant from Renfrewshire. The spark for Wallace's rebellion ignited in May 1297, stemming from something small and personal, as is often the case with historic turning points. The precise details are lost to time. Perhaps it was the murder of his beloved Marion Braidfute, as later poems suggest, or simply witnessing one injustice too many. But when William Wallace drew his sword against William Heselrigg, the English sheriff of Lanark, he crossed a line of no return. Heselrigg's killing sent shockwaves through occupied Scotland. Here, at last, was a man willing to shed English blood. Here was someone who refused to bow, who faced Edward Longshanks's seemingly invincible war machine and declared, "No more." The response was immediate and electrifying. Men began disappearing from their farms and workshops, slipping away into the forests and hills to join Wallace's growing band of rebels. But William Wallace was no mere bandit leader. He had something that turned scattered resistance into organized rebellion, a brilliant tactical mind, and an unshakable belief in Scotland's right to freedom. When he addressed gathered crowds, his voice carried the weight of divine conviction. "We fight not for glory or riches," he proclaimed, "but for freedom alone, which no good man loses, but with his life." In the autumn of 1297, Wallace confronted the full might of English power at Stirling Bridge. The odds were daunting. Perhaps 6,000 Scots against 15,000 English troops, including Europe's finest heavy cavalry. English commanders John de Warenne and Hugh de Cressingham were so confident of victory, they viewed the battle as mere training. They watched from across the River Forth as Wallace and his co-commander, Andrew Moray, positioned their forces on the high ground of Abbey Craig. What followed defied every military textbook of the time. Wallace waited patiently as the English began crossing the narrow bridge, a process that took hours. Cavalry, infantry, and baggage trains all funneled across the slender span in a long, vulnerable column. Any conventional commander would attack immediately, but Wallace understood something his enemies did not. Timing is everything. When exactly half the English army had crossed, Wallace gave the signal. The Scots poured down from the heights like an avalanche, their war cries echoing off the water. The English, caught with their forces split by the river, could not leverage their superior numbers. The bridge becomes a scene of terror as fleeing soldiers trample their own comrades in their desperation to escape. Hugh de Cressingham, Edward's treasurer in Scotland, and a man despised for his cruelty and greed, falls early in the battle. In a gesture of seething rage, the Scots flay his corpse and make belts and purses from his skin, a grotesque trophy of their victory. By the end of the day, the supposedly invincible English army lies shattered, and William Wallace has achieved the impossible. The victory at Stirling Bridge transforms Wallace from rebel to national hero overnight. He is appointed Guardian of Scotland, the kingdom's de facto ruler, and for a brief moment, it seems as though David truly has slain Goliath. Wallace leads raids into northern England, returning the brutality inflicted on Scotland with interest. English civilians flee as Scottish warriors burn everything in their path. The psychological impact is devastating. If William Wallace can defeat England's best, what other impossibilities might occur? But Edward Longshanks is no ordinary adversary. The man who conquered Wales, who has spent his life in warfare and earned a fearsome reputation on crusade in the Holy Land, does not forgive such humiliation. He abandons his campaigns in France, recalls his finest knights, and begins assembling an army solely aimed at the total destruction of William Wallace. The two forces meet again at Falkirk on July 20th, 1298, and this time, the English king takes no risks. He has learned from Stirling Bridge, studied his enemy's tactics, and brings overwhelming force. Wallace, despite his tactical brilliance, cannot work miracles. His army, largely made up of poorly trained spearmen, faces the elite of English knighthood, backed by Welsh longbowmen, whose arrows can pierce armor at 200 yards. The battle is a massacre. The Scottish schiltrons, dense formations of spearmen, with pikes pointed outward like giant hedgehogs, hold firm against English cavalry charges, but cannot protect themselves from the arrow storm raining down. Welsh longbowmen, positioned with precision, pour thousands of arrows into the packed Scottish ranks. Men fall by the hundreds, their screams lost in the thunder of hoofbeats and clashing steel. When the schiltrons finally break, the English cavalry pours through like water through a cracked dam. John de Gramme, Wallace's closest friend and most trusted lieutenant, dies fighting to the last, his body pierced by dozens of wounds. The Scottish army disintegrates, leaving the field carpeted with their dead. Wallace barely escapes, his dreams of independence seemingly crushed by English steel. Falkirk marks the start of Wallace's darkest chapter, forced to resign as guardian, abandoned by nobles, who now see him as a liability rather than an asset. He becomes a man without a country. Some sources suggest he travels to France, seeking support from Philip IV in his fight against Edward. Others place him in Rome, pleading Scotland's case before Pope Boniface VIII. What we know for certain is that William Wallace becomes a ghost, a legend whispered about in taverns but never found. Years pass. Other men take up the banner of Scottish resistance. Robert the Bruce, once a collaborator with the English, starts his own campaign for the crown. John Comyn, Wallace's rival for leadership, makes his own deals with the occupiers. Scotland's nobility, ever pragmatic, adapts to the new reality of English rule. But Edward Longshanks does not forget. Somewhere in the shadows lurks William Wallace, the man who humiliated him at Stirling Bridge, and until that man is dead, England's victory remains incomplete. The end comes in August 1305, not through glorious battle, but through betrayal. John Menteith, a Scottish knight who has sold his soul for English gold, lures Wallace to a meeting near Glasgow. Perhaps Menteith promises aid for a new uprising, or offers intelligence about English troop movements. The exact details matter little. What matters is that William Wallace, exhausted by years of hiding, desperate for any chance to strike back, walks into a trap that costs him everything. When English soldiers surround him, Wallace's first instinct is to fight. But he is alone, outnumbered, and years of constant flight have taken their toll. The giant who once dominated battlefields like a force of nature finds himself bound with chains, a prize for his greatest enemy. The journey to London is designed as much for humiliation as transportation. Wallace is paraded through every major town, displayed like a captured beast for the entertainment of English crowds. Children throw stones at his cage. Adults hurl filth and curses. Each mile takes him further from the land he fought to free and closer to the agony that awaits. Edward Longshanks could have simply hanged Wallace. A quick drop, a snapped neck, and Scotland's greatest hero would be silenced forever. But Edward is not interested in mere execution. He wants to create a spectacle so horrific, so terrifying, that it will crush the spirit of resistance for generations. He wants every Scot who hears of Wallace's fate to understand the cost of defying English rule. Westminster Hall, England's greatest seat of justice, provides the stage for Wallace's final performance. The hall itself is a monument to English power, its massive oak roof soaring nearly 100 feet overhead, its stone walls carved with the heraldic symbols of conquering kings. Here, surrounded by the physical manifestations of English authority, William Wallace faces his accusers. The charges against him would be laughable if their consequences weren't so severe. Treason against King Edward, though Wallace never pledged loyalty to the English crown. Murder and robbery, though the men he killed were occupying soldiers, and the wealth he seized was used to support Scotland's liberation. Sacrilege, though his only offense was refusing to bow before false authority. When given the chance to speak, Wallace's response echoes through the hall like thunder. I cannot be a traitor to Edward, for I was never his subject. I owe him no allegiance. He's not my king. His words seal his fate, though it was determined long before he entered the hall. The judges, with a verdict already decided, pronounce the sentence that will transform William Wallace from a man to a martyr, to be hanged, drawn, and quartered. Even in medieval England, known for its cruel punishments, this represents the height of judicial savagery. Reserved solely for traitors and exclusively for men, as the law considers it too indecent to inflict on women, it is designed not just to kill, but to utterly destroy. The condemned man will endure multiple deaths, each more agonizing than the last, until only scattered pieces remain for the ravens. The morning of August 23, 1305, dawns gray and oppressive. London has been buzzing with anticipation for days. Vendors sell meat pies and ale to the gathering crowds. Nobles secure the best viewing spots. Children, who should be at their lessons, push forward for a glimpse of the famous prisoner. The bloodlust is palpable, thickening the very air. At Westminster Hall, Wallace is stripped naked and bound to a wooden hurdle, a crude sledge used for dragging heavy loads. The symbolism is intentional. He is no longer a man deserving of basic dignity, but cargo to be transported. A rope is tied around his feet, with the other end fastened to a horse's harness. As the animal lurches forward, Wallace's body begins its final, terrible journey through the streets of London. Every cobblestone becomes an instrument of torture. Wallace's flesh, already weakened by months of imprisonment, tears away in strips as he's dragged over the rough stones. His head bounces sickeningly against the ground. Blood streams from dozens of wounds, leaving a crimson trail that dogs eagerly lap up. The crowd follows like a diseased parade, their jeers and curses mixing with the scraping sound of flesh against stone. The procession winds through London's narrow streets for what feels like hours, passing the grand St. Paul's Cathedral, where priests cross themselves and look away, bustling markets, where merchants abandon their stalls to join the mob, and noble homes, where onlookers watch from windows with a mix of fascination and revulsion. Wallace drifts in and out of consciousness, his body a symphony of agony. yet his lips move in what might be prayers, or perhaps curses. Smithfield, the execution ground, lies ahead like an amphitheater of death. Known as the Elms for its great trees, it has witnessed countless executions over the centuries, but none quite like this. A platform stands at the center of the field, surrounded by crude wooden barriers to keep the crowd at a manageable distance. Ropes and pulleys hang from a wooden framework, like the rigging of a hellish ship. Braziers burn hot and ready, their flames dancing with eager anticipation. The executioner waits by his instruments, like a craftsman preparing for his masterpiece. He is chosen for his skill in prolonging life rather than ending it quickly. His role is not merely to kill William Wallace, but to orchestrate a performance of suffering that will be remembered for centuries. The execution begins with the hanging. Wallace, barely conscious from his ordeal in the streets, is hauled upright and positioned beneath the gallows. A rough hemp rope, thick as a man's thumb, is looped around his neck with practiced efficiency. The crowd falls silent, their bloodlust temporarily quenched by anticipation. But this is not the merciful hanging of ordinary criminals, where a swift drop snaps the neck for a quick death. Instead, Wallace is slowly hoisted into the air until his feet dangle inches from the ground. The rope tightens around his throat, cutting off his breath, but not his circulation. His body convulses, fighting for air that will not come. His face turns purple, then blue, his eyes bulging as pressure builds in his skull. The crowd watches in fascination as Wallace's powerful frame writhes and spasms. Some cheer each convulsion, others place bets on how long he'll survive. Children, lifted onto their father's shoulders for a better view, point and laugh at the dancing man. Minutes pass long, terrible minutes where Wallace hovers on the brink of death, his brain starved of oxygen, but his heart still beating. Just as unconsciousness begins to claim him, the executioner signals. Wallace is lowered back to the platform, the rope loosened just enough to let precious air back into his lungs. His body spasms as he gasps desperately, his chest heaving like a bellows. But there will be no rest, no merciful fade into darkness. The worst is yet to come. The second phase, the drawing or disembowelment, begins while Wallace still fights for breath. Sharp knives glint in the morning sun as the executioner makes the first cuts. The blade slips under Wallace's ribs with precision, opening his abdomen from sternum to pelvis. Blood pours onto the platform, forming steaming crimson pools in the cool air. Wallace's eyes snap open as the pain cuts through his semi-conscious state, like lightning. A scream tries to escape his throat, but his damaged larynx produces only a strangled wheeze. His body arches against the ropes binding him as the executioner reaches inside his body cavity with practiced skill. What follows defies every natural law of human endurance. The executioner, working patiently like a surgeon, begins removing Wallace's organs while he is still alive. First, the stomach, uncoiling like a gray snake as it's pulled out. Then the intestines, yard after yard, glistening and steaming in the morning air. The crowd roars its approval as each organ is held high before being tossed onto the fires. The smell of burning flesh mixes with the metallic scent of blood and acrid smoke from the braziers. Many in the crowd cover their faces, yet none look away. They cannot. This is a spectacle beyond their wildest imaginations, a display of state power reducing a man to his parts, while thousands watch and cheer. But even this is not the end of Wallace's ordeal. The final indignity, castration, awaits. The executioner's blade flashes again, and Wallace's manhood is severed with a single, efficient cut. The crowd's roar reaches a fever pitch as the bloody trophy is held aloft before being thrown onto the flames. The symbolism is clear. This is what happens to those who dare challenge English authority. Somehow, incredibly, Wallace still lives. His body reduced to a hollow shell, he continues to fight for each breath. His eyes, though clouded with pain and nearing death, still hold the spark of defiance that has carried him through years of struggle. Even now, as his life ebbs away, William Wallace refuses to break. The final act, the quartering, must wait until death finally claims him. But when it does, it comes not with surrender, but with something almost like triumph. Wallace's lips move one last time, forming words only he can hear. Perhaps it's a prayer, a curse upon his enemies, or simply the name of the land he died trying to free Scotland. When the great heart finally stops beating, the executioner steps forward to complete his grisly task. Sharp axes rise and fall with mechanical precision, separating Wallace's limbs from his torso with wet, meaty sounds echoing across the suddenly silent field. The proud head that never bowed to English rule is severed with a single stroke and held high for all to see. The crowd, finally satisfied by the spectacle, begins to disperse. Yet Wallace's journey isn't over. His head, preserved in tar to prevent decay, is placed on a spike atop London Bridge, the first ever to adorn that famous crossing. His 4 limbs are sent to the corners of his homeland, Newcastle, Berwick, Stirling, and Perth, serving as warnings to those who might follow Wallace's example. Edward Longshanks believes he has achieved the ultimate victory. The man who defied him is not just killed, but obliterated, his body scattered like dust. Surely, the king reasons, no one witnessing such a fate would dare risk the same. Surely the spirit of Scottish resistance is crushed forever. Yet tyrants throughout history have misunderstood a fundamental truth about martyrdom. The death of the body can birth something far more powerful than any individual. Even as Wallace's remains rot on their spikes, something stirs in the Scottish heart. The brutality of his execution, instead of forcing submission, ignites a fury that will burn for generations. Within months of Wallace's death, Robert the Bruce kills his rival John Comyn in a church and declares himself King of Scotland. The Wars of Independence, far from ending with Wallace's execution, enter a more savage phase. At Loudon Hill, Bannockburn, and other battlefields, Scottish warriors carry Wallace's name into battle like a banner. Wallace becomes their war cry, striking terror into English hearts. Edward Longshanks never sees Scotland subdued. He dies in 1307, just 2 years after Wallace's execution, allegedly commanding his son to boil his flesh from his bones and carry them at the head of every English army until Scotland is conquered. But his son, Edward II, proves much weaker than his legendary father. Under his ineffective leadership, England's grip on Scotland loosens until it snaps entirely. The final irony comes in 1320, when Scottish nobles sign the Declaration of Arbroath, perhaps the finest statement of national independence ever penned. Its words echo through the centuries with the defiant spirit that William Wallace carried to his death. As long as but 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any condition be brought under English rule. It is not for glory, nor riches, nor honors that we fight, but for freedom, for that alone which no honest man gives up, but with life itself. William Wallace never saw his dream of Scottish independence fulfilled, but his sacrifice planted the seeds that would eventually bloom into freedom. His execution, meant to be the ultimate display of English dominance, instead sparked the very outcome Edward Longshanks aimed to prevent. In the end, this is perhaps Wallace's true triumph. The man who died in agony at Smithfield, his body torn apart and scattered to the winds, achieved in death what he couldn't in life. He achieved immortality, not in body, but in the enduring spirit of a people who refused to submit to any master but the one they chose. Today, over 7 centuries after that gray morning in London, William Wallace's name still stirs hearts and inspires action. His story has been passed down through generations, each finding inspiration for their own struggles. The body that was so brutally destroyed has long since turned to dust, but the idea it symbolized, that freedom is worth any sacrifice, that certain principles are worth dying for, shines as brightly as ever. Standing in modern-day Smithfield, watching the traffic pass the memorial plaque marking where Wallace died, one wonders what he would make of his legacy. Would he be gratified that his death ignited the revolution he sought in life? Would he be astonished that his name remained spoken with reverence in the land he cherished more than his own life? Perhaps the answer isn't in speculation, but in the simple fact that we still remember. In an age where fame is fleeting and heroes are quickly forgotten, William Wallace endures. His story continues to inspire those who face daunting odds, who stand alone against overwhelming power, who refuse to compromise their principles, even at great personal cost. The brutal execution of William Wallace was intended to conclude the tale of a troublesome rebel. Instead, it began a legend that will outlast empires, a testament to the human spirit's capacity to triumph even in defeat. In dying as he lived unbroken, unbowed, and utterly defiant, William Wallace achieved the only victory that truly matters. He became immortal. And so, the spirit of that tall man from Renfrewshire still walks among us, reminding us that some things are worth fighting for, no matter the cost. In every act of courage against overwhelming odds, in every stand for principle over convenience, in every refusal to bow to unjust authority, the spirit of William Wallace endures. The body they quartered and scattered to the winds has long since turned to dust, but the dream he died for, the dream of freedom, burns eternal.